What's up? It's Johnny King. Welcome to another episode, Johnny King Show. I am here with my man Derek McCoy. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Johnny.
We're again just hanging out in my house. It's very casual. That's what I love about the show is just getting brothers and sisters together. Literally just had my sister on the show last episode, but yeah, just getting together real casually and having conversations that we would have otherwise, whether it be at a restaurant like we had last time. But I heard about Derek because he was, let's say, the keynote speaker at what was it called? Creative Mornings. Thank you. Yeah. And then one of my buddies was there. Was like, hey, you got to check out Derek. He's got such good stuff to say. He's very articulate, brilliant guy. So I reached out to you, and gratefully you responded. And we got some food at Avanti, and then the rest is history. So you're going to be so as of this recording, as of right now, he's going to be my next speaker at my men's meeting this coming week, which is going to be exciting. And we're going to talk about a lot of things, which are we set this up months ago.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, just the timing of everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah, we met right before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And then it was like, all right, we're going to get together. And it's like, nope, quarantine it up. And here we are, though. We stuck together.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Gratefully. So thank you again for being here and being part of the men's meeting on Monday. But we've had some good conversations just about, well, why don't you, before I even get into it, why don't you just tell a little bit more about your background and both education, sports, a little bit more of your, from 30,000 foot view, your life story.
My elevator pitch on myself. Expect no brilliance because I don't identify as a brilliant human being, but I did get decent grades growing up in school. I come from Colorado, Thornton, Colorado, just north of Denver. Grew up geeking out on sports, and I actually liked school too. I'm kind of a nerd. And then after high school at Skyview High School, graduated in '99 and had the opportunity to play football at the University of Colorado. Played up there for 5 years, redshirting, and started at wide receiver for my last 3 years up there.
Nice.
Had a pretty good career, concluding with some broken records and prediction to get drafted in the NFL in the third round. And then I went to the NFL Combine in Indianapolis and had one of the worst days of my life. I underperformed. It was interesting because I could play in front of thousands of people and not get nervous. And here I was in an empty stadium at the Colts Stadium in front of general managers and scouts. And I got really nervous and just had a really bad performance. So blessing in disguise, I took my draft stock off the radar and got a free agent look at the St. Louis Rams. Learned a lot from there. The greatest show on turf. Shout out to Henry Ellard, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, all these guys.
That's when I was living in St. Louis.
Kurt Warner was on the squad.
I watched all of that, yeah.
I'll never be I'm still blown away to this day. They just came off the Super Bowl, and here I am walking through the weight room, and I see Kurt Warner right there, and he reaches his hand out and says, "Hi, I'm Kurt Warner." And I was just blown away that he was so humble that he told me his name. I'm like, I know who you are. Can I have your autograph kind of thing?
Exactly.
But
awesome.
My experience in the NFL was short. I was not for longer. And I call it a blessing in disguise because I was really hiding behind football. I would not have been able to have a conversation with Johnny King that was authentic because I was really shy and introverted. And football, sports allowed me to kind of hide that part of myself. So I didn't really have to speak up much. And after football, I was sort of forced out of my shell into, something that's, less comfortable for me, which is speaking in public. Since leaving football, I worked in Mapleton Public Schools where I grew up, did some coaching and teaching over there, and then I got exposed to this organization, Project PAVE, who I've been working with for the past 8.5, 9 years now. And now I direct a violence prevention program over there, which I really frame as we promote healthy relationships and healthy masculinity. So when I got connected with you through Creative Mornings, shout out to Lauren Shaw and Dave Momper over there, I was really excited to hear what you were doing and just, instantly connected with you and have a lot of commonalities in our experience with masculinity. And I really appreciate you opening this conversation up to the world because guys need to talk and we have a lot to work through and transform around our culture, and you're a huge part of that.
I appreciate it. And likewise, I think it's one of those things that I know that like we were talking about before we even started recording, there's plenty of examples of what not to become as a man, especially as a white man of power, abusing so many different people and powers that it's really scary. And then I was talking with another one of my black buddies the other day. He's like, where's all the where's all the black leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and like the Martin Luther Kings and everything else of this generation,
Mm-hmm.
who's speaking up. And it's one of those things where I think, um, just in general, I don't care about, in terms of this conversation, black or white or everything in between, just where are the healthy versions of men,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like with the Me Too movement, everything else, like women and the world are calling out for that,
Mm-hmm.
And I think if it weren't for all of my crappy things that happened in my life too, I probably would still be a shell of a man as I was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how things happen in your life, my life, that we could probably talk to as the catalyst to
Yeah.
evolution as a man and finding our sense of masculinity. And
Mm-hmm.
tell me a little bit more just about your upbringing, though. Did you have a father figure, a male mentor? Did you have anything? Was it
Yeah.
coaches?
Yeah. I'll piggyback. I'll piggyback your friend that you talked with on the Where Are the Men of Color before I go into my
Yeah, for sure.
testimony. I was just watching a PBS special on the Black Panthers last night,
Mm,
and it was very strategic of the FBI to deconstruct the Black Panthers because they saw a threat to their power.
mm,
So they criminalized this organization, and in that process, made it very intentional that when these leaders spring up, they get assassinated
mm,
basically. So you have Malcolm X gone, you have Martin Luther King Jr. gone, you have the leads of the Black Panther gone,
mm,
and that was what was really strategic. Is if we can basically cut the head of these organizations off, then the rest will die. The body will die, right?
mm,
And I don't want to call these organizations a snake. I intentionally didn't say that. But ultimately, what's happening right now is there's a movement not led by one individual leader, but there's a movement of all of us, and
yeah.
I feel like we're a part of that. And there's so
That's
many.
cool. Yep,
You
that's a good point.
cannot kill a movement
That's a good point.
without leaders. We're all leaders. So if I go back to my childhood, um, growing up in the Church of Christ, Jesus, similar
Yep,
model, right? One leader.
yep,
It's easy to martyr one leader,
yep,
right?
yep,
So get rid of that leader, and then that movement changes.
totally.
But I grew up going to the Church of Christ, and I'm very thankful to my parents, my mom and dad, and my grandparents for exposing me to that. Even though I didn't like church as a child because it was a little bit drug out,
Yeah,
those messages that Jesus spit out, just they stick in my heart to
yeah,
this day.
yeah.
And my dad, I was fortunate enough for the first. Actually, I didn't really know my dad until I was about 3 years old because he was stationed outside of where we were living.
Mm,
Um, and my mom was sort of my primary caregiver along with my sister. So I think I learned to be, empathetic and in tune with my emotions a bit in those first 3 years, which
yeah.
led to me being called gay on occasion,
Oh, really?
which, I'm fine with being led by women in my early years. I think that's a strength for me for that
Mm,
foundation.
mm,
But then when my dad came in the picture, he struggled with different issues around mental illness and addiction, coming from trauma and his
yeah,
experience with
yeah.
masculinity. And my home was a fractured home with domestic violence, and I didn't really get exposed to that because of the strength of my mom and my sister sheltering me from that.
Mm,
But my dad was ultimately my coach from the age of 5, 6 until I was about 11 years old, and then he kind of went MIA on addiction. So I was blessed to have a father figure for those years of my
yeah,
life, and I'm still grateful for that. And I do this work in part not to demonize my dad, but to try and understand what is it that men go through that lead them to that path of mental illness,
yeah,
addiction,
yeah,
domestic
yeah.
abuse, even suicide. I have too many people on my network um, that have taken their own life, whether my cousin
Mm,
Chris, my good friend from college, Gabe Oderberg, Rashawn Salam, the only person at the University of Colorado that won the Heisman Trophy. So this
mm.
experience with my male influences leads me to like, how can I be a part of the solution in transforming how we view and practice masculinity?
No, that's huge. That's huge. Well, and I think that's the important part, is that I do feel like, and it's been said before, that all of the, well, not all, that's a broad brush, but let's just say the majority of the world's atrocities and I don't know, horrible things that happen in the world are kind of provoked by, I feel like, men that are deeply wounded, like we
Yeah.
talked about before we started
Hmm.
recording. It's like that's the sad part. It's like you can kind of look back and see that it's it's a cry for help,
Hmm.
or a cry for significance,
Hmm.
or it's just so much pain that, like, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me type
Hmm.
approach. And that's
Hmm.
the sad part, whether it be, you know, club shootings, movie theater shootings, driving through crowds,
Hmm.
driving planes into buildings. It's all of it. It's like, what are we doing? You know?
It's, to me, it's a testament to the culture of masculinity being associated with dominance over others,
Mhm.
right? I want to see that narrative shift from dominance over others to I get to be in control of my own emotions.
Mhm.
I get to experience these emotions and in a holistic kind of way where
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed of any of those
Yeah.
emotions on the spectrum.
Yeah.
But that's not the narrative yet. We're working towards getting
Right.
there so that
Right.
we can be whole humans. But when the narrative is your masculinity is associated with power over people,
Mhm.
you're going to see you're going to see all these atrocities over and over. And
Mhm.
we're at a point 401 years into, the American slave movement, and prior to that, like dominance was the culture that led to
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
like we're rooted in thousands of years of dominance over us as the standard and the
Yep.
norm.
Yep.
And we have for far too long in this country pointed at those individuals as opposed to why is there so many individuals? What is it about this collective culture that's producing these
Yeah.
individuals? Maybe we need to change this collective culture instead of just pointing at the individuals.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of way I approach that in a sort of how can we stop demonizing the individuals and start transforming the collective expectation?
Because I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you hit on something that I've thought about too. Is like, let's just look at the feminine mystique.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not just women in general, but let's say those that are more primarily hardwired feminine
Mm-hmm.
have gone from a traditional role up through the 40s and 50s to still include and it to be okay that you could be a stay-at-home mom,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
All the way to running for president,
Mm-hmm.
running uh, global companies and things like that, and everything in between. And yet, when you look at the masculine mystique, it has still not really evolved much beyond physical prowess,
Mm-hmm.
money, uh, yeah, just like power and that whole kind of like primal sizing up everyone in the room to see like
Yep.
whose ass could I kick, and
Yeah.
if not, then I guess I'm lower on the totem pole. It's just like,
Yeah.
are we still cavemen? And in some respects, that's how we act.
That's how we're wired, though, too. Is it the amygdala, the amphibian brain, right here
Sure.
at the brainstem?
Yeah.
Um, if you think about like how our culture promotes masculinity, it teaches us to be in our primal
Yeah.
brain, right?
Yeah.
There's a quote from a Harvard scientist that says, "We are running off of primitive, no, it was what is the word they use, Paleolithic emotions,
Mhm.
godlike technology, and medieval institutions,"
Mhm.
right? So if you think about like how the masculine culture glorifies sex as a competition, as a conquest, if you think how the masculine culture glorifies like, I always say we're taught to shut up with our emotions and fight with our
Yeah.
fists. To your point, the
Yeah.
dominance over each other as
Yeah.
opposed to the collaboration with each other,
Mhm.
all of these things fuel the perpetuation of not evolving but staying in that
Yeah.
primal brain,
Yeah.
which, conquer and divide. It keeps the power systems in place
Mhm.
if we're just spinning competition against
Mhm.
each other, which is
Mhm.
why, I keep hearing people say what the revolution is. Well, this is the revolution
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
We're not competing with each
Yeah.
other. And since the day we met, we've been very collaborative
Yeah.
and trying to find that common grounds of how can we collaborate to make an impact
Yep.
outside.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that to me, and then the feminine mystique that you bring up, what's interesting to me is the feminine mystique, I feel like has been stifled in development too because of masculinity. And when I hear you describing women taking on these different roles, that's really women kind of morphing to fit into the masculine
It's still,
culture,
yeah, it's
right?
still like business and everything
Yeah.
that's masculine focused.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Right. Well, and I was going to say too, in terms of that concept, I think it's we probably talked for 10 or 15 minutes before we started recording. We probably should just start recording, but
Yep.
it is what it is. But to rephrase what I said earlier, which is, you know, so much of what's going on is around the world that our atrocities are dealt by the hands of, I think a lot of it by insecure um, men who are deeply wounded. And I feel like, at least I can only look at, speak from my experience, that as I've continued to heal my own bullshit and, trauma from my past, have I been able to get to a point where I'm not threatened by someone else's gifts. you
Mm-hmm.
know don't get me wrong, it still comes up. I still get it, where there's that twinge of like, oh, I don't and then I have to check myself. I'm like, well, where's that coming from?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And
Yeah.
is that, and sometimes it is as primitive as like, oh, he's taller than me. He's better looking than I am. He's younger than I am. He's more successful. I'm like, God, does it really come down to that? But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's my initial reaction, which is just a very kind of low energy, um, reaction to life in general and judgment, and
Mm-hmm.
to one of my other buddies who's been on the show, Rashawn, like it's just like implicit biases that I have. I'm sure I've been programmed through my upbringing that I'm not even
Mm-hmm.
aware of,
Yep.
right? That have me judge people for their skin color or their size or their success or their
Mm-hmm.
sex and I just need to you got to bring it I feel like a big part of it obviously is bringing it to the surface so I become emotionally aware of it,
Yep.
and then you start to kind of unravel it, I guess.
Yeah, that to me is you just basically gave a template or a recipe for developing emotional literacy. We are deeply taught to be emotionally illiterate, specifically as boys and men. So, in that process, what you're modeling to me, and I think is really important here to keep in mind as men, as we start to transform our wiring, our neuroscience
Yeah,
inside, is not to be ashamed of that stuff coming up, but to what you're doing is dialoguing with it. Okay, I'm catching myself and I'm catching myself in maybe a bullshit moment where I'm problematic, but don't be ashamed of that. Just think about how you were wired
yeah,
to express yourself
yeah,
that way,
yeah,
because ultimately we get into this paralysis when that stuff comes up and then we start to feel shame around it.
yeah.
It's like, no, the process of transformation should not include being ashamed
Right,
of your past
right,
experiences,
right.
but dialoguing with them so that you can transform, because we all have the power to rewire our neurons in our brain
Yeah,
if we do the work. It's
right,
just rehabituating how we think about things.
right.
So being intentional about that, and like even looking to like, hey, you're a good looking dude. I look at you, Johnny, and you're a muscly kind of guy. I can tell you work out. You're in shape, bro.
I'm a muscly type of guy. I'm a meathead, is what you're saying.
Not a
Damn you.
meathead.
Yeah, right. Well, and I was going to say too, it's Brene Brown talks about how like the antidote to dealing with shame is like to get it out into the open. Like it
Hmm.
only feeds on itself and grows in areas of
Until you
secrecy,
name it, is what she says, right?
right? Yeah, until you name it, until you like get it, until you expose it.
Hmm.
And men especially, I feel like, because they come out of the men's meetings. That's a big part of just my monthly men's meetings. Like just to allow men to facilitate conversations to where they realize, oh, I'm not the only one that feels shame
Yep.
or feels like I'm not enough.
Yep.
Like when you start seeing that, then you start to see, at least for my process was to allow myself to understand that this is actually more just human behavior of how we were programmed out of maybe survival.
Yep.
Um, and yet, if you can intentionally then, like you said, name it, you can give yourself the grace
Hmm.
and the forgiveness to then begin to level up without shaming yourself for feeling
Hmm.
that way.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of the evolution of progress in that
Yeah.
sense.
And when it comes to us men starting to open up and share that kind of stuff, we
Yeah,
break ourselves out of that isolation,
yeah,
because I use the bro code as the example, right? Here's this card, the man card, right? Man up and you get this card, right? Well, that card expects you to throw out your true self,
mm-hmm,
inauthenticate yourself to live up to this card.
mm-hmm,
Terry Crews, I think, says it well. That man card is given and taken, right?
mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm.
doesn't matter how much of that man card you have. If you slip up in these man rules, then that card is taken, right? And there's the man on man policing, the boy on boy policing that comes with that. Which in that policing, we degrade femininity with
Mm-hmm.
feminine language. We
Totally,
degrade gay people with gay language,
totally.
and it just perpetuates this inauthentication of self.
Yeah,
I'll go for this card. Forget yourself. Throw your ass out the
yeah,
window
yeah,
to get this card.
yeah.
It's not fully accessible for anybody because it's not a human card.
Right,
It's a construct
right.
of control over us. And then when we realize that, it's like, oh, you're dealing with that too?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know this card existed, right?
Right.
Even though those rules are pretty firm in place, when we name it, it's like, oh, I don't want that. I want me.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, I think I struggle. I go back and forth with some things because two different things that pop into my mind while you're saying that is one is like all of and I've said this on past episodes, but it's relevant to this conversation. Whereas every time I put out Facebook ads
Mm-hmm.
to drive men in the Denver area to my men's meetings. There's frequently one, if not a couple of guys that say some type of gay slur,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or challenge us as not men.
Yep.
Because if you're not really a man, I mean, if you're not a man, but you're looking to get together with other non-men
Mm-hmm.
to talk about masculinity, then you're not a man to begin with. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that comes up, and I'm like, oh, there's just a lot of kind of chauvinist,
Yeah.
biases that come out just on comments of my Facebook ads. I'm like, this is why we're doing it. This is
Exactly.
exactly why we're doing it.
Yeah.
But the other thought that I have too is like I struggle sometimes because we all have our wounds. We have all struggled, and I've talked openly about my past failings, whether it be in relationships and business and health and all those other things in my life. And then I have other friends who have struggled with, infidelity,
Mm-hmm.
or family members and things like that. That's like, I guess the challenge for me is like, do you take away that, like, where's the line of like unconditionally loving them
Mm-hmm.
and continue to hold them to a higher standard
Mm-hmm.
versus just kind of like doing what guys a lot of times do, which is like, I'm just going to sweep it on the rug and not really pay attention to. I know what you're up to,
Mm-hmm.
like even if we're like performance enhancing drugs, kind of be like, dude, you just do your thing. I'm going to keep doing my thing, even though we're on the same team together,
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not going to be the whistleblower, but I also am not going to say anything. But I feel like that's even from what I was watching last night. I'm going all over the place, but I was watching the Jeffrey Epstein Netflix documentary, and there's so many people that just kind of turned a
Mm-hmm.
blind eye because of his power and money. I'm like, where's that line between the Matthew code of like calling a brother out
Mm-hmm.
while also just not giving up on them entirely? Because
You,
I've done both.
yeah.
I've had buddies who I'm like, what, screw you. I've also had buddies who've said totally screw me to me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm kind of like, come on, bro, where's the bro code of like having my back,
Right.
right? And so I struggle then with like how to find that. What are your thoughts in that whole conversation, if that makes sense?
No, it does make sense, and it's a big question, because there's so many layers to
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah,
And going back to the man card, um, I have had situations, and I'll share a story for this, and
yeah.
it's sort of the call in versus the call out approach,
Uh-huh.
right? Um, I've been called out, and that typically is like, all right, let's fight,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
In subtle or extreme ways.
yeah.
So before I got educated on masculinity and socialization, I still had these morals and values in me. And I always took issue with the objectification of women and girls,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that we talk about women and girls when
Mm-hmm.
women and girls aren't around. That really bothered me. And then there's this expectation of the man card that's between us,
Yeah.
and we can talk differently when they're around. But it's this two-faced kind of expectation,
Totally.
right, that shows up when we call each other out, or we do something that breaks that code. So I'll go back to I was about 25 years old, and a friend at the time who was very misogynistic, and had layers and layers of unresolved trauma, from childhood sexual abuse to family members passing away, just trauma after trauma, and being born dark skinned in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
which hopefully everybody realizes now is not really a free thing.
Right.
So for me, it was like, well, where's the respect for women? Why wouldn't you have the respect for women? And I was really thinking from my perspective instead of all of his adverse childhood experience. But I called this dude out right in front of a woman that he was seeing at the time, and I knew for a fact he was treating her like an object, because when we were by ourselves, he was calling her an object basically. So I call him out, and I broke the bro code, and I basically fractured that friendship. And his thing was, D broke the bro code, he's out of the man club kind of thing. And my thing was, pardon my language, fuck the bro code. I think in human code,
Yeah.
which if you study psychology, there's more that overlaps between male and female that is human than there is these extremes of masculine and feminine. We're all kind of human, XXXY, right? We have to have that X first. We're all coming from a woman. But if I go back to that experience, like, I would have never called him out way this day right here, because I understand all of his trauma, all of how broken he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
That he didn't hear that. So I would have rather taken him to the side, like, man, let's talk, like,
Yeah.
why do you think that being with all these women and using them is going to heal your trauma, right? I didn't have that language at the time. I didn't have those skills.
Mhm.
So when it comes to pausing and reflecting upon how the masculine culture has maybe damaged you in your experience, I want to lean into Brene Brown's work again.
Yeah.
Like, shame does not work, and that's what I tried to do that day. Is that's my only tool. Shame
Shame them.
you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If we can pursue others with curiosity, and then creatively engage them in a dialogue. Now, rather than trying to control them, I'm trying to understand them and giving them a dialogue so that they can reflect for themselves and come to that answer for themselves. And I
Yep.
don't think that's just a masculine thing. I think in general, most humans
Yeah.
would rather be able to figure it out themselves than be told what to do.
Correct. Correct. Because it still comes back to, I think, our deeper fears of not feeling like that we're enough
Yeah,
and that we won't be
exactly.
loved. And so that's like, it's important, especially for men, where I feel like women are a lot more collaborative. Like, well,
Hmm.
tell me what your thoughts are. Like, men are like, well, don't tell me directions.
Yeah.
I want to figure it out myself because I
Yep.
have to prove it to myself, right?
Hmm.
And so I feel like that's a big part of the ego that needs to be put aside
Yep.
in that sense. But it's like, you're absolutely right. Like, that's the challenge, and that's what I've been thinking through. I'm like, is knowing about one of my buddies, behavior that's not necessarily the of highest vibration, if you will,
Hmm.
not calling them out, really just allowing it to be perpetuated. Am I enabling it versus saying something but doing it in a way, and that's the scariest thing, is like doing it in a way that's loving,
Hmm.
empathetic,
Hmm.
compassionate, without hopefully burning that bridge.
Yeah.
Um, but knowing, and I'm almost from the place of like, I would rather at least say something and say, hey,
Hmm.
bro, this is how you're showing up to me,
Hmm.
and this is, and challenge him to kind of raise his game. And if he's not willing to step into that,
Hmm.
then I guess it is what it is.
Got to change the front row seats of your life, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, to your point, one other additional comment I was going to make was just how that culture is perpetuated and maintained due to silence, right?
yeah,
So you're
yeah,
you're exactly correct.
yeah,
I think maybe calling out is better than silence,
yeah,
but for me, I just recognize how calling out is often a shameful approach
totally.
and it's felt as shame. But there's ways that unavoidable, right?
Yeah,
Where it's not a call in moment. Like,
yeah,
what you're doing is problematic and dangerous
yeah,
and it's jeopardizing that person's safety. So
yeah,
we definitely need to intervene in whichever ways we feel safe to do so. But silence is the exact reason
yeah, it's true.
why. And you see that in George Floyd's passing right there, right? Like, that masculine culture of silence towards other men. Like, you can say something about somebody else or even do something to somebody else, but you can't call out another man on that bro code. Whereas, you have an Asian police officer, another police officer that looked like me without the beard,
Mhm,
and then another white police officer in Minnesota who none of them say anything
mhm,
because that man card was actually more ingrained in them
totally,
than their morals and ethics. That
totally.
man card says, fuck your morals and ethics.
Mhm,
Masculinity is the
mhm,
patriarch and the dominance. And it's not saying it in that language,
mhm,
it's coded language,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
But when we start to point at and talk about the coded language, I think more guys that you're talking about come on your show that look at that card might pause. And that to me is what we want to do, is just influence them to pause for a second
Yeah,
and
yeah,
critically think, is
yeah,
this masculine culture really
yeah,
working for you? Is it really working for
yeah,
us?
yeah. Which I think is the importance, going back to just being being fathers to the next generation,
Mm-hmm.
actually being present,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because going back to what you mentioned earlier, I've watched now a couple of times 13th, the documentary on
Thank you.
Netflix, which was like, you know, to cut the head off of the snake, if you will. Um, it's like, let's dismantle all the leaders of the black community,
Mm-hmm.
systematically from the 80s until now, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, by incarcerating. And why is it that, as it says at the very beginning, we have 5% of the population in the US and 25%, and 25% of that population is incarcerated, most of them being black males,
Yep.
right? So that's ruining. I'm a fervent believer that, like, having the balance of masculine and feminine to mentor and
Mm-hmm.
properly raise the next generations,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like is a big challenge. I see a lot of my buddies who have healthy relationships with their wives or with their significant others, whether we're talking about straight or gay. It's like if they're coming from a healthy relationship of mom and dad,
Mm-hmm.
they're attracting a healthy partner.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times I'm seeing guys that are really struggling are attracting unhealthy relationships, and I'm part of it as well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that statistic, and I think a lot of that is like it comes back to, gosh, thank God I know what I know now, so that when I have kids in the future, I can kind of just support them and not tell them exactly how to be, but just to increase their level of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And you've got 3 kids, 2 kids.
I have a daughter who's 20 from a previous
Yeah.
relationship, and now I'm married with 2 little ones, who's
So
5 and 7.
what's that like? Just being knowing what you know, knowing what you're imparting
Mm-hmm.
upon them, versus maybe what you didn't get when you were growing up, or
Mm-hmm.
just actively taking a role in that, which I think is helping change the masculine
Yeah.
mystique and the has it
Yeah.
been
It's, we pursue parenting in a sort of gender neutral way
yeah,
in a gendered world,
yeah,
right? So, same sort of expectation for discipline and behavior for both little ones.
hmm
Um, but realizing we live in a gendered world and they're wide awake,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And awake in the womb. And once they come out, and people think that this is this empty vessel, and it's like, no, when you have a baby, that baby is whole.
yeah, yeah,
And then you get into, they're exposed to the world,
yeah,
right? Through the media, through the schools, through friends,
yeah,
and they start to formulate their identity not just based on what they're seeing their mom and dad do, but what they see other boys and girls do in society, other men and women do it in society. So gender neutral in a gendered world where we have a boy that, he grew his hair out from birth. He never wanted a haircut, and he got his first haircut in no, in first grade. He got his first haircut, or right before first grade.
yeah,
And no, that's wrong. At the end of kindergarten, he got his first
yeah,
haircut.
yeah,
So he has hair with a ponytail right here, and you can imagine,
yeah,
only boy with that kind of hairdo.
yeah,
He's getting called a girl, pulled hair, these kind of things, and he doesn't want me to go off into the school and go off, which I wouldn't do.
yeah,
But so he filters some of this stuff and makes it seem like it's better than it is,
mm,
until he makes this decision that he says is for himself to cut his hair, and it's
mhm,
like, we know, we see, we hear.
mhm,
There's some reasons besides just your own choice.
yeah,
So
yeah,
he gets that haircut. He identifies as a boy and always has, even with the ponytail. And the little girl, she dresses like a princess. And
mhm,
what's interesting to me is they are parented with consistency. Um, Playing with dolls together, stuffed animals, digging in the dirt, working with
mhm,
me, playing
mhm,
with trucks. They
mhm,
both play with the gender toys. They play with girls and boys toys, which to me is, that's foundational for how we're socialized,
sure,
is what toys we're given and what toys we're not given.
yeah,
And you already start to marginalize through the toys, and you see it in the toy section, what's for me and what's not for me. And if I'm doing something that's not for me, I'm going to get marginalized. Pink section for the girls to this day.
mm,
The
mhm,
boys section has more greens, reds, blacks, blues, more colors actually on the boys section. But girls are being taught still to this day to be more nurturers. Get the
totally,
baby doll. Boys are being taught more to this day to be soldiers.
totally,
Go play rough, right? We
mhm,
think boys are just naturally rough. They're not. We're teaching them to be rough,
mhm,
and girls are just naturally nurturers. We're teaching them to be nurturers. Girls and boys are so much more than that, but we kind of pigeonhole
for
them
sure,
into this. And to me, it's just a matter of having that dialogue with them. Dress like a boy, dress like a girl, status quo, whatever, cool.
mhm,
Um, but we all need to learn how to work through our emotions, and let's talk about what you're going through. So um, it is this interesting phenomenon, because I know too that like most boys aren't getting this kind of conditioning. So just being transparent about,
totally,
like, this is what other boys are learning, so that's why that's showing that,
mhm,
right? And we all have to defend ourselves.
mhm,
So learning that from a gentle upbringing, like, our little guy doesn't like to fight, and I respect that in
yeah,
him. He's a peaceful person, but there's people that take advantage of that in this world.
correct,
So it's like, I don't have the answers to that question. I'm
yeah,
human moving through this
yeah,
and just adapting along the
yeah,
way.
yeah. But what a great gift for you and lady and you and your lady to kind of impart that upon them, just because they're going to be so much further ahead
Well,
than
we'll
than
see.
I
I think,
was.
yeah, than us, but yeah, and I think that there's a lot more emotional intelligence in general.
Yeah,
It's becoming more of a societal level
totally,
priority,
totally.
and I want to see social emotional literacy kind of foundational in early childhood through college,
Yeah,
and it should be a part of our workforce right now, because we're lacking emotional literacy. And no shame to us, we just, that is something that, reading, writing, and arithmetic, we are all analytical,
mhm,
and we're realizing, okay, well, guys have a high suicide rate. Why is the the identity with the most power, 35 to 55-year-old men, have the highest suicide rate,
Mhm.
right? And why is it male-bodied people that commit suicide at a higher rate? Not that girls never do it, but it's a far higher rate. And then most mass shootings and acts of violence, as you were talking about atrocities earlier, 98% male-bodied people,
Yep.
right? Women have access to guns.
Yep.
Why aren't they going out and shooting places up?
Yep.
Well, it's not a part of their identity to feel inadequate without power over people, right? That's
Mhm.
not a part of their socialization. So you see white males doing this. You see males in general doing these things as an act of like, how do I get my power back? And didn't realize that that card never gave you your true power, and your
Mhm.
true power has nothing with dominance over anybody.
Mhm. Mhm. The few times that I have felt deep shame for when I've snapped,
Mm-hmm.
snapped at one of my best friends on the soccer field, a few other places, I I just was so lost in my head. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I was so angry, so like I wasn't even present to
Mm-hmm.
anything. I wasn't even. I mean, I was playing soccer, but I wasn't really there, and it just was a boiling over point. You
Mm-hmm.
know, which again goes back to circle around to what we were talking about, where I feel like it's so healthy and where men don't typically do this, and that's why I'm working to change that narrative too, to just talk about their feelings. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I had a buddy yesterday that posted like on Facebook that he's really struggling, and I reached out to him like, hey, would you like to talk about it? But there's still that sort of that reluctance as well, like
Yeah.
I don't know, that's what women do.
Yeah. We'll talk
I'll
about
figure it out.
it. Yeah.
You know, it's like that's the challenge. But I
Yep.
feel like if you don't, it's just a pressure cooker.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't actually let it out in a healthy way, then it comes out
Oh yeah.
in horrible ways, whether it be something as bad as suicide or shooting other people, or it shows up in like, you know, being addicted to working out, you know.
Exactly. I was gonna say perfectionism.
Yeah, perfectionism, working out, you know, women, or
Mm-hmm.
just, you know, being promiscuous.
Mm-hmm.
There's just comes out in a lot of, and I think that's what starts to skew that whole like toxic masculinity
Mm-hmm.
expression, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which I say it's called toxic. It's just kind of like the shadow. It's the hurting side, wounding side of
Yep.
masculinity, you know?
Did you watch The Last Dance with the
Yes.
Bulls? Okay,
Yes.
so this has so many layers of what
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah.
about in it. I love how emotional Michael Jordan is in
Yeah.
it. How he's not afraid to show,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I still get a tear over that. Go ahead and cut the cameras. And this is what people refer to as maybe the greatest sports star of all time, right? Like my generation, our generation, we're like that's where we're coming from.
Who I
Um,
looked up to was he was
that's what I'm
my guy.
in your story of soccer, and then if I put myself in high school basketball, like that's where I got my sort of identity was in sports. And it wasn't just in sports, it was being really good at sports and winning at sports. And I remember a dunk contest in high school, and my buddy's 40th birthday was recently, and I apologized to him because this is a friend that I grew up with, and here we are in a dunk contest in our high school basketball team, and I win all the dunk contests because I can jump higher and do all these things or whatever. And I lose this dunk contest. The coach is like, all right, you guys are in. And I'm like, what? I definitely did the bigger dunk. And I'm looking around like, how is
Yeah.
this even possible?
Yeah.
Right. I kind of felt like Jordan when he lost. Like
Yeah.
that was my
Yeah.
archetype. So my friend comes up to me and is like, calm down, Derek, you always win. And I get into an argument with him, and then I get into a fight with my good friend,
Yeah.
right? And I hit him.
Yeah.
And I still regret that to this day, but I see that I don't shame myself for that. I see that that's a learning moment for me. And it's the same thing with Michael Jordan is winning is never enough. It's like you got to keep winning and winning and winning, right? And that's how I was kind of programmed to see life. And that's the man card right there, right there. Like, is winning really that fulfilling in those ways?
Right.
Is beating others really that fulfilling? It was more fulfilling than winning that dunk contest? Being at my friend's 40th birthday party. That was more fulfilling. Seeing his kids running around, that was more fulfilling.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that might come to your story about soccer. If this like competitive rage might have been something to do with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, and I've kind of watched it through twice now, The Last Dance, just
It's a
because
good program.
and that's the thing. It's like, just as a guy, and I watched the other one on Lance Armstrong. You know,
I gotta watch that one.
yeah, it's really good on ESPN Plus. But you know, there's a guy where he came in. You see a lot of similarities between MJ and Lance, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Lance now didn't have the father figure, or he had an abusive father figure, stepfather figure, and at the very beginning of that whole documentary, and I'll get around to my point, is uh, his mom either changes his birth certificate or whatever. And she kind of like, I mean, he was really competitive. He wanted to get into the triathlon. So I fudged a little bit
Hmm.
because he was 1 year younger. So, I mean, but he still smoked everybody.
Right.
I was kind of like, no, that's exactly where
That's the
parenting,
foundation.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
where you're making it okay as a 14 or 15-year-old
Yep.
athlete to lie
Mm-hmm.
just so that you can win, rather than, hey buddy, just keep training, you'll get there next year.
Yep.
That sets the precedence for him, and he came into a sport that was already doping and everything else. So he kind of was like, well, do I join the ranks and succeed? So I kind of see like win at all costs. I look at that again as like it's the science of achievement. It's like you can focus totally on winning, but then are you going to actually be fulfilled at all?
I never was. I've won
Right?
championships throughout my whole life, and I just told my mom recently that being such a successful athlete who
Yeah.
made it to the NFL, always getting good grades in life, and I did not start to feel adequate about myself until I realized that I never had felt adequate about
Mm,
myself. And this is 2 or 3 years now that I'm starting to work into
mm,
feeling
mm,
adequate. But to piggyback your point about Lance Armstrong, if you go back to Michael Jordan's childhood,
mm.
his adequacy was not in Mike being Michael Jordan, the human being.
Right.
It was in, oh, I have to be a competitive athlete to fit in with my family, and then I
Hmm.
have to be that in society.
Hmm.
So that card had a huge impact on
For
Michael
sure.
Jordan to this
For
day. I
sure.
mean, he's hunting Marlins right now as we speak, trying to get that championship.
Yeah.
And my thing is, how can we instill in boys and men that they're good enough?
Right.
Not by winning against others or
Right.
over others,
Right.
but by, I feel that honestly, Johnny, I feel adequate right now. I feel adequate in our conversation.
Hmm.
And it's not, I'm better than you, you're better than me.
Hmm.
It's, we're building together. And I
Yeah.
felt this same adequacy when I first met you.
Yeah.
If I were competing against you in a sport right now, I don't think I would feel as adequate. And is that a challenge to the power structures? Yeah, absolutely. But the power structures that be are not allowing for people to embrace and enjoy themselves.
Hmm.
I deeply believe that Michael Jordan deserves to feel adequate
Hmm.
regardless of his
Hmm.
championships. And I'll bring out Junior Seau is the same. One of
Yeah.
the best linebackers of all time is no longer with us. And I know CTE and everything, but what about his masculine conditioning that didn't allow him to feel adequate with his humanity
Right.
post retiring from the
Right.
NFL?
Right. And I think why I bring that all up too, to piggyback off your idea, is like there's a part of me, whether I'm watching MJ or Lance, even though Lance cheated,
Mm-hmm.
as well as everyone that he was competing against. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, there's still a part of me, even though I think he's kind of a dick, he's an asshole. I still like MJ more,
Yeah.
because MJ was clean and he did it, right in many different ways, but was also kind of an asshole to
Oh
his
yeah.
teammates,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a part of me, just as a man, that I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me that still respects their commitment to their craft and the ruthlessness of, is it maybe winning, or maybe it's just more, as I'm literally saying this, I think maybe it's more just that level of high standard
Yeah.
that they kept, that I aspire to
Mm-hmm.
emulate without necessarily rolling over people,
Yep.
but I
Yep.
love the whole team aspect, of doing together versus, being on like a solo team sport.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's actually, now that I said, more of what I respect about both of those men is just that, not win at all costs, but just that willingness to risk
Mm-hmm.
failing or
Mm-hmm.
putting all that you've got into it and not actually being enough,
Yep.
which I'm sure a lot of those guys that competed against, I mean, how many guys
Yeah.
played against Jordan? It was like, they were so good.
Yeah.
Barkley, let's say,
Yep.
like they got no championships, and like, damn it,
Mm-hmm.
or people that are playing against Tom Brady, you're like, damn it, like,
Yeah.
do I really have to be playing against the GOAT right now?
Yep.
Like, that's brutal, but yet at the same time, of course, you have to look at it as you're the best of the best. You want to go up against the best, so it's an
Yep.
opportunity,
I
right?
honestly get like kind of amped up just hearing you say that because
Yeah,
I still have that in me. I'm
yeah,
wired. I'm wired for that kind of
right,
competition, but I have transformed myself, and I think that this can be the collective shift is to where I too admire that level of
yeah,
drive
yeah,
and passion
yeah,
to just pour yourself into it. Because
totally,
honestly, when I'm in the process pouring myself into something, I feel the most alive and
yeah,
most free right then
yeah,
because I'm not worried about this or that. I'm present in the moment, and I think that that's something that we can look at Jordan and even Lance Armstrong
yeah,
and so many others. for that work ethic.
Yeah.
But how can we pursue that kind of drive and ambition, not to beat others, but to build self? Because
Correct.
in that process, Michael Jordan did build self to a
Yeah.
whole nother level,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Was it for the purpose of dominating others on the opposing team? Maybe, but
Yeah.
regardless, he
Yeah.
built himself.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what sports has given me to this day, drive and this work ethic to, regardless of what the outcome is, bring it every day.
Yeah.
Do whatever you can every day. And over time, that's going to, even if Jordan didn't win all those championships, it still wouldn't have been
Yeah.
a bad thing, right? Like you think about the Utah Jazz.
Yeah.
Those guys were freaking phenomenal, right? They
Yeah.
could never beat Jordan.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I see them get on the camera. I see John Stockton hop on the camera, and he doesn't seem like he's, fractured for life because he never beat Jordan.
Yeah.
That was not in vain for him.
Yeah.
And I love his statement too. Like, I didn't care who Jordan was. We were coming out to do what we did, which was focus on us and come out with the win. And I think that if we just reframe what the win is,
Correct.
the win is personal growth,
Right.
as opposed to the win is beating Johnny.
Right. The win being a standard of excellence,
Mm-hmm.
which is what, like,
Yep.
what I was talking about with the book that I'm writing. It's like that's
Yep.
to become, or at least to be able to look back on your life and be like, I left it all on the field.
Yes, sir.
That's all I really ask for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if we collectively were all to do that as men and as women, then all we could do is raise the standard of of excellence, not perfection, but excellence in terms of like just going all out, being the best, just being the best that you have with your God-given gifts, to be the best spouse, parent, whatever your craft is, to have the best health. Like I think that's just the best thing that I at least kind of aim for, is like, I want to be someone that is worthy of being emulated, not from like, up on a pedestal, but like, no, he set a bar, just kind of like Michael Jordan did. And I played basketball wanting to become MJ as well. It's like, okay, set the bar, but not from a place of like lack of worthiness, but more from a place of like, if he can do it, then that means I can do it, because we're all coming from, in my belief, coming from the same source. So it's just an expression to me of God in each of us, and we all have our own talents. I'm not built like LeBron James. So, does that mean I couldn't made it to the NBA? Of course not. But I mean, I very well could have if I put in the time. I think it's just about like, where are our gifts best utilized, and then just to go full into those versus holding back out of fear, which is what I did primarily for the most of my life, or 30 years of my life, fear of actually going all in, because then without going all in, when I did fail, in my mind, then I had at least an out. Because in the back of my head, I'm like, I didn't fully give it. Anyway, I didn't go all in, but had I'd probably been really good. I could have gone D1 if I'd actually tried. Jeez, Johnny, just, so that's been my whole charge over the last 10 years of personal growth, has been like, set that standard, and then kind of like Michael Jordan did. It's like, and that's what I liked about him, was like, during practice, I'm going to give you hell, because I know when we get out there in game 7, in the moment, like, that's going to be even worse. Like, if you can't handle this, bro, then get off the team. And that's kind of where I want to, create that sense of brotherhood around me, of brothers who are like, we're setting a very high standard, and I'm going to call you in to being your best, right? Otherwise, what's the point of this life if we're just kind of allowing, what do you call it? I'm trying to think of a certain word. Just settling for good enough, essentially. Right? Which I'm not a fan of. And it triggers me, because I've done that for too much of my life.
Okay. Yeah. And if you think about the balance of that, though, because I think about the Bulls again, and it was, and there's people that don't like Michael Jordan for who he was in practice with his teammates or whatever. But I just want to point out that Michael Jordan did not create the oppression that he was born into. And the avenue to get out of that oppression was basketball for him. It was school and football for me. And I was pursuing basketball as well. But he was in that arena that he didn't build, that honestly white society built, right? And he is a real world example of, this is what has to be done to meet that level of expectation that people want to get out of this. And he took it to a whole nother level, because People talk about Kobe Bryant and all these other athletes, but my pushback is I don't really like to rank people at all because I
Yeah.
think that's part of the problem. But Michael Jordan took it to such a high level that he went from the Bulls being not at all known anywhere to every channel in the nation, every city in the nation had WGN on it.
Uh,
I got to watch Michael Jordan every night
yeah.
when I was a child because he was so good and he met that white cultural standard of excellence,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we can't shame him for what he did there because that was also the white cultural standard that he
Yeah. He had to
he
fit
knocked out
into
of
it.
the park.
Yeah.
He hit
Yeah.
that home run, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, his true humanity comes out in his emotions and his interviews and the relationships that he values as a person
Yeah.
and his teammates' testimony that outside of the court, he was really easy to be around.
Yeah.
He was fun. He was
Yeah.
joking. He was
Yeah.
all these things. So don't think that Michael Jordan on the court is authentic Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Who he is on the court is
Yeah.
authentic Michael
Yeah.
Jordan. And that's the case for a lot of institutions in the United States. We force ourselves into whatever we need to survive in that arena.
Mm-hmm.
And we often get discredited for who we have to be to survive in this world when it's like we wouldn't even really be that, but here's the social standard that we live up to.
Mm-hmm. So I guess then the question is how do we go about constructing the playing field, with the rules that we want for our generation or generations to come,
Mm-hmm.
by maybe unraveling the game that has been set up for us, which is not fair.
Right.
It's
But
like, oh,
still
you all
keeping the same work ethic though.
correct, still saying that standard of excellence, but then leveling the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like, hey, me and us white guys are up here and you all start back there, and
Mm-hmm.
this is not going to be a fair race, but this
Mm-hmm.
is the race that we're running.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we create that to where it's just, there's, like you said, multiple to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take time, probably
Yep.
multiple generations,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at least, like I said, at the end of my life, and I've said this multiple times, and I think you're maybe just to have said that I've taken responsibility for my behavior
Yep.
and done everything I could to kind of maybe to deconstruct certain things and to
Mm-hmm.
construct a healthier way of being.
Yep.
For ourselves and for future generations is all we could probably ask for.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to read Standard of Excellence. But also in this conversation, what I feel like the new true playing field is throw this damn man box card rules out the door. And you often hear people using this phrase, I'm staying in my lane, right? I'm doing my thing, I'm staying in my lane. Well, I think that the new framework should be authentication of this true self and development of this lane, right? And that lane might get broad or narrow depending on what facet of life that I'm in. But that authentication of your lane building, you're in your lane, I'm in my lane, and that's actually a win-win situation. When I'm doing my thing in my lane, I don't have to control you to try and be what my lane is, because my lane needs that complement of your lane. And if we could look at ourselves as not this one automatized version of masculinity, but this broad range of masculine expression and feminine expression and non-binary expression. All of that, though, is masculine and feminine is human. And I think that when we get to how do we model feminine and masculine in a healthy way, understanding that masculinity has been built on the rejection of femininity to this point, I think that before we own our masculine and feminine as men, I think we have to label that as human. I think you and me can handle masculine and feminine. We'll do that, right? We're a little bit, we're steeped in this reflection. But the guy that's coming in that's fully like, this is pussy stuff. Right? I need to frame his emotions as human to him because they are human. And having a way to meet people where they're at, not with shame, but understanding, so that they'll wake up to see that like where I'm at it wasn't built for me, and I deserve better, and we all deserve better.
It's funny you say that because that's literally what I was going to say is like in concluding this, conversation, because we could probably talk for hours, like how do we take, not how do we take, but someone who's listening to this, and I'm just trying to put myself like in my own shoes 10 years ago, when all like this, a lot of this conversation might have gone over my head, or it might be grasping some ideas, but it just sounds like, well, like, I don't even know if I'm on your guys' level. You guys are on the varsity level, not, I'm blowing hot air up
We're
our
almost
skirts.
on the
But
varsity
yeah,
already.
we're competing for varsity. No, and I didn't mean to say it that way. But like we put some work into it,
Right.
right? We can have this type of conversation, which I would not have been able to have many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that guy, like, okay, this all sounds theoretically interesting, and I'd like to be able to get to that level, but I'm at ground zero.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you recommend a guy who's just getting started in this conversation, like you said, who's maybe like arms crossed, be like, okay, you've cracked open something for me, but I don't know exactly where to begin. Where
Mm-hmm.
does a guy start to chip away at that,
Mm-hmm.
mask or
Mm-hmm.
the layers? Like, what would you say in terms of just helping a guy get started in terms of evolving?
You're one of the best question askers I know. And if you ask me that same question tomorrow, it probably sound a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because it is a great question. But I would honestly start with write down your story of what you learned masculinity means, what man up means to you.
Yeah.
Write a list of all that, and also in that, as you're writing that list, reflect upon those moments in your life where these sort of mandates were enforced by men or boys, right? And then I want you to, after you write that list, I just wanted you to put a big WHY question mark
Yeah.
at the bottom of that.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
So that you can just pause and look at it, right? Because that's what woke me up to it. I came out of the NFL and started working in the public schools in Mapleton Public Schools, and I was working with a group of 8th grade boys, and our counselor, Allison Lucero Hoffman, she came and she was like, "Hey, would you be interested in this Project PAVE coming to your class? This is what they're about." And this lady from PAVE, Inetti Rodriguez, who's now the Associate Director of Gender and Equity Studies at Metro State University, she comes in and gives this workshop about teen dating violence and healthy relationships. And a portion of this workshop included an activity around the man box and the ladylike box. And when she did this reflection with us, she didn't give us any of the answers. She said, "You heard this term, man up," and she put real man.
Yeah.
You act like a lady's. Anybody heard that? Okay, she put this up there. So what are all the things that this means? And she had us list out, and this is 14-year-old boys. I'm kind of not chiming in because I want them to take the lead.
Yeah.
And as she mapped this out with them, I was just like, oh, that's the story of my life right there. That's why I was called gay. It had nothing to do with my sexuality, and I love gay people, great. But I was called gay because of these things. I was showing too much respect to girls. I was supposed to be objectifying them in this box, right? So when I saw that box, the man rules on a list, it was just like chillingly revelatory for me. And it wasn't shame. It was a wake up call. Like, wow, light bulb went off. Okay. And I was expected to live up to these standards. And then she asked us to put all the words and actions that keep this framework in place. Well, what do we call a guy who's not living up to these things? And then all the feminine words come out, all the gay words come out, and man up, stop acting like a bitch, don't be a pussy, faggot. All these terms say get back into that box. Don't be you, be this man box. So when I realized that after she did that activity, it was exactly what I was just saying to you. Like, it was a list. Why? Oh, because we're not expected to be our true self. We're expected to fit into this box that nobody really fits into.
Totally. It's so restrictive,
Mm-hmm.
and it does not allow for a whole lot of, like you said, wiggle room.
Nope. And it's given and taken.
Yeah, exactly. And I fought that too, because I remember being in high school, like being the athlete, being popular, being that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had a big heart for people too, and so I would talk to people who were less popular, let's just say that, right? But then I would get called out for it. And then I remember one time in particular, I was with the guys in the locker room, like, no man, she's just like I caved, no, it's just like I'm just. And around comes the corner is her brother, who I just talked badly about, because I actually really did like her, but I didn't want to lose face with the guys.
Yep.
And the guy threw me up against, like, he was a big football dude, and I almost got my ass beat. But and then I felt shame because I'm like, I'm being two-faced, and then I'm teasing other people in math class and this and that. I'm like, just to be cool, you know how it is in high school. But yet we still do that a lot.
Oh yeah.
as adults all
Yes,
the way
sir.
through our lives. And I think that's a
Absolutely.
big part of what you're saying, which is like we need to break open that box, or not
Mhm.
even break it open, just redefine it
Yep.
completely.
Yep. Sensitive, thoughtful, compassionate guy.
Yeah,
We need you. Keep being you.
yeah,
Gay guy out there. We need you.
yeah,
Keep being you.
yeah,
Right. And that to me is what guys need to hear
yeah,
is that regardless of your attraction or your sort of character makeup, like you are valuable, you
yeah,
are
yeah,
worthy.
yeah,
And the more compassionate and sensitive you are, the more ostracized you get by the masculine culture.
yeah,
And my pushback is F the masculine culture on that. We need you
yeah,
to be you,
yeah,
because we need you to be a part of this
yeah,
transformation, because
yeah,
those guys that are pushing on you and teasing you, bullying you, they are impacted by this same card. They're
absolutely,
not demons. They're
absolutely,
just this two-faced expectation that we're all supposed to live up to.
yeah.
But until we have the courage and the confidence to be our true selves, we don't transform that
Right,
narrative.
right. Which is why so many of the gay men that I've had come into my men's groups are deeply, just scared and
Mm-hmm.
intimidated by, like, and just saying, a lot of them uniformly say, I've just always been intimidated by that real masculine
Mm-hmm.
man,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them don't feel like they're man enough
Right.
because they're,
Right.
and being that, I've worked through my dad coming out 12 years ago or 13 years ago, and it's a lot easier for me
Mm-hmm.
to make that transition. I'm like, oh, but you're still my dad.
Yep.
I still love you,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. But it is kind of nice to see, not only the stuff that I'm doing, the stuff that you're doing, just the world in general. It's coming along,
Yep.
slowly but surely, just starting to let those constructs of prejudice or judgment start to break down, because it's saying something to someone just a couple of hours ago, like, I would not probably care so much about all the uh, BLM stuff going on if I didn't actually have other good buddies of color that I have now in Denver because of the work that I'm doing.
Yep.
Otherwise, I'd probably still have white friends, like I always have.
Yep.
And this stuff has happened because I came from St. Louis, and you know, all I've lived long enough to have enough of these beatings and
Mm-hmm.
then rioting to be like, oh, here goes another one. Where
Mm-hmm.
this one was like, no, these are it just to put a face
Yeah.
and a personality
Yep.
and a person to a movement, whether we're talking about BLM or gay rights or
Mm-hmm.
feminine rights,
Yep.
or it's like, man, all of this is just all part of the same type of effed up kind of
Yeah.
interconnected web that's been built before we were born,
Yep.
but now we need to be aware of it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like personal development for the world.
Yes.
Right,
Social, collective human
right,
development, right?
right.
And one thing that I want to point out in that vein is that this country was very strategically segregated, and racism was maintained covertly,
Yes,
right? So
yes,
it was sort of hidden from the general public outside of the marginalized people, right?
yep, yep.
As a marginalized person, I have known my whole life that police kill unarmed people of color,
Mm-hmm,
mainly men. I've
mm-hmm.
known that, right? And what is to me the powerful point right here with social media and just how connected we can be with this is that racism would not be systemically ingrained like it is right now
Yeah,
if the majority of people who identify as white knew that.
yeah,
It wouldn't. Segregation has allowed, has prevented most people who identify as white,
yeah,
like yourself,
yeah.
from seeing what the marginalized experience really is,
Right,
and therefore doing something to challenge that.
right.
Right? I know that we wouldn't be right here right now if most people who identify as white really knew what
Totally agree.
the marginalized experience
Totally
is.
agree.
And that's why I have hope right now.
Yeah,
Because I do see that a minority, the consolidation of white male power, that minority of us that has
yeah,
power,
yeah.
that veil of their innocence is starting to peel back,
Mm-hmm.
and the majority of us are showing up. I mean, when I see one light skinned lady, and I say light skin as opposed to white,
Yeah.
because I do believe the black and white construct is also what perpetuates that light good, dark bad,
Yeah, yeah,
white and black.
yeah,
But when
yeah.
I see this light skinned lady in Montana who
Mhm.
probably identifies as white holding up a sign by herself about Black Lives Matter, she was the sole protester. And then when I see the news going around from city to city, and I see some cities primarily white. I see Mitt Romney
Yep.
and the crew in Salt Lake City, and Spike Lee made a joke about this. The Jazz aren't in, so there was no people of color down. But it was primarily people who identify as white
Yeah.
marching for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
That's when things start to change.
Yep.
If we could have transformed our marginalization in the past 400 years as
Yeah.
dark-skinned people, we would have. We
Yeah.
tried to.
Yeah.
And we got criminalized, demonized, martyred in every way
Yeah.
to maintain the power structures.
Yeah.
But again, my faith is in the majority,
Yeah.
not the minority.
Yeah.
And that minority of power is transforming quickly because all of this collective rage and compassion is coming out in policies to where we're going to redirect funds to social emotional support as
Yeah.
opposed to punitive punishment.
Yeah.
Punitive punishment wouldn't work. Back to your point on the 13th is, you know, out of this whole globe, we have 5% of the globe's population in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We have 25% of the globe's prison population in the United States. Well, why do we have that? Because prison is the slavery of today.
Yep.
It's how slavery
Yep.
has been kept alive. And
Yep.
the 13th Amendment did that. And we need to rework some of these constitutional amendments
Yep.
because slavery should not be. We did that in Colorado in 2018. We changed the Colorado
Yep.
Constitution because we put a voting amendment that said we're not going to allow slavery to be justified because someone's deemed criminal. But it was clear that time. If you go back to 2016 in the Colorado ballot, the language was tricky. We didn't understand it and we didn't vote for it. So that language kept alive. So this is a real turning point for us. And as you see, it's stemming around the globe.
Yep.
It's not just the United States. So
Yep.
I feel a sense of extreme hope right now, but I'm not banking on it. These incidences happened before. So I'm sort of like, all right, people who identify as white, let's see the change.
Yeah. Which I think is a healthy way of approaching it. Because I think it's just like, I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. That's my gut instinct, which is like, let's just not get overly confident.
Definitely not. I'm not confident at all. I have hope.
Yeah, I have hope too. And that's where it's like, okay, which to me keeps a healthy amount of pressure on the white community to do something about it.
Yep.
Otherwise, if it's like, oh yeah, we did, all white people did enough posts on social media, we're good now. Like,
posts don't change the policy.
No, that doesn't do shit.
Posts don't change gentrification.
And I put a black square up the other day, you know, and then I took it down because like I put it up just because I got on social media that day, Blackout Tuesday, whatever. Just saw it. It's like, well,
let me join in.
Yeah, and then I was like, what? I don't even know what this. Why am I doing this, or where did this originate from?
Yeah.
So I took it down because I was like, that's just another great example of like, oh, everyone's running in a direction, so I might as well run with them. I'm like, no, stop before I act. You know, think before I act, and that sort of thing, and just start questioning all of. It's just challenging because it's COVID. There's just a lot of rawness to people's emotions, you know. But I think maybe that's the perfect time, you know. You know, so anyways, thank you for being here. Appreciate you being here.
Looking forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah, we're going to do this again. Would love to hear you guys' feedback and responses to anything that resonated. And if people wanted to further conversation with you or get in touch with you, is there any way that they can reach out and get in touch?
Go ahead and shoot me an email, dmccoy@projectpave.org. That's my work email. I will correspond with you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Johnny.
Really appreciate
Love
it.
you, brother.
Love you too. We'll catch up with you soon. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll check in with you later. Take care.